going to tell you you are flat wrong. The reason that it's going to be winter is because God wrote it into existence. I'm going to put 4 seasons out there, and that's how we're going to divide time. And I'm going to tell you 6,000 years ago, they had spring, they had summer, they had fall, they had winter. And it's been doing that year after year after year after year after year. Not because a scientist figured out, not because a meteorologist can predict the next snowfall, but because God is faithful. Winter comes because God is faithful. And spring comes to remind us of God's consistency. And summer follows that to remind us of God's consistency. But you see, we've heard that kind of stuff so much that we can sit smug in our pew and we can say, I know that already. I'd like to hear something else. I want to hear something else, but I'm here to preach to you this morning that God is a consistent natured God. And there are things, the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. Everything that you see is a perfect model of consistency from a consistent and a faithful God.
Yes, sir. Hallelujah.
He says, you have no need that I write unto you.
All right, come on.
You already understand this. You know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye brethren are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. He said the normal people that live a day-to-day life in the world are so caught up with the goings-ons because it is normality for them. That's just life as it is. But God put these things there where we can watch them and be reminded of His consistency. And when we watch the seasons, and when we watch the clock, and when we watch, I'm going to tell you, you're going to go to bed tonight, and tomorrow morning, you know beyond the shadow of a doubt that the sun is going to rise, because that's the way it is. But have you ever stopped to think about that the reason God does that is to remind you that as consistent as He is with the sun rising and the sun setting, He also said that He was coming back to get a church that was out spot or blemish. I'm going to tell you something. Every time the sun rises and sets, that ought to be a reminder that God is consistent. And He may not have come back yesterday, and He may or may not come back today, but just as sure as the sun rises, tomorrow morning the SON is going to rise in the east one morning and split the eastern sky, and so shall we ever be, Lord. Amen. Hear what I'm telling you? Stay with me just a moment.
Good stuff.
Stay with me just a moment. He said, you understand these things. You have been enlightened. And so when he begins to preach and begins to wrap this chapter up to them, he knows that when he writes specific wording, that they are going to get it. And they're going to understand it. And they're going to be able to get with it. He's not going to leave them confused. And so in verse 16 of our text, he writes unto them, rejoice evermore. And in verse 17, he writes, pray without ceasing. Now, I pose to you this morning a very simplistic question. How many of you, and I hope that you tell the truth this morning, how many of you can honestly say that you rejoice in your life evermore? You rejoice 24/7, 365 days a year. How many people under the sound of my voice rejoice 24 hours a day, 365 days a year? Any takers? Anybody want to stand? Anybody want to trade places? Because you need to be up here instead of me if you do that.
Amen.
Next verse said, pray without ceasing. How many people pray 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? We have got to find, Brother Condi, reconciliation to those two scriptures, or we're going to be lost because we are in violation of the Bible.
Right.
Paul said, you know God's consistency, like the seasons, like the rain, like the snow, like all the precipitation. You have no need that I write to you about that. Your nature's been changed.
Right.
He says, rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing. Nobody can do those things And thank God for rejoicing and thank God for praying, but that's not what this message is about. That's something else. I'm not against either one of those. We need to rejoice and we need to pray, but there's more to that than what meets the eye. Amen. What Paul is teaching here, he said, somehow, some way, ladies and gentlemen, you have to form a relationship with God.
All right. Gotta be there.
That's cyclical.
Gotta be consistent.
Every day. Every day. Every day. Every day. Every day. Rejoice in the Lord. Pray without ceasing. What he is saying is somehow we have got to figure out how to tap into the nature of God and say, God, help me be faithful.
Yes, yes, yes. Help us, God. Help us, God.
Help me be consistent.
Help us, God.
Because Jesus said, as the musicians come, this is the way the kingdom is. I have called you to be servants for me. This kingdom business is not optional. The title, listen to me now. The title, I didn't say everybody was one. The title of servant is not optional.
Right.
I don't care if they are the bass player for Kiss. They are created and owned by God.
All right.
Their title, whether they do it or not, is a servant of their Creator.
Yes, sir.
Listen to what I'm saying.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's right.
Don't leave here and say, Brother Pollock said a rock player was, I didn't say that. They were created by God and they belong to God.
All right. They do.
Whether their nature is serving, that's another message too, but whether their nature is servitude or not, that's on them. He said, you don't have a choice. This is what you are called to live for me.
Yes,
Right.
amen.
Now, that's your choice whether you do or not, but I've created you to worship and serve me.
Yeah, yeah.
Listen to me.
Come on. That's good.
And not only is that your option, and that's another message, this is the crux I want to get to. Secondly, it's your option whether or not you're going to be faithful or consistent. And he said, there are servants that I'm going to joyously, as you stand, joyfully, I'm going to excitedly, I'm going to happily look at them and say, well done, thou good and consistent, faithful servant. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. And it's because you have been faithful over a few things that you get to be made ruler over many. God has put us in the temporal. He has put us in the natural to be faithful over a few things. Church attendance, living for God, worship, praise, prayer, study, tithe, obedience, servitude, love one another. Now, one more example of God's nature. God is consistent.
Yes, he is.
So at this moment in time, are the oaths that he swore on his consistency, are they going to change at this moment somehow? Is his nature going to subdivide? And all of a sudden God become And I almost hate to use God and liar in the same sentence, but God become a liar?
No. No.
If you are inconsistent and unfaithful, God is not going to lie to you
All right.
and say, you can come in here, good and faithful servant.
Right.
And if you are inconsistent with temporal things
Right.
and unfaithful, if you won't even lift your hands, I'm going on record. I might be the only preacher you are not going to be saved.
That's it. That's it. That's the bottom line. Amen.
That's right. Amen.
Come on.
If you do not obey your pastor, you will not be saved.
That's it.
The more I say that, the better I feel.
There you go.
I just like being, I don't like pronouncing judgment on people, but I just got to be honest with you. This is where the rubber meets the road, and I hope some of you come back tonight. It's my last service. If you won't attend church regularly, you ain't gonna be saved.
Amen.
Well, that's tough to say because I got family members that are supposed to be in church and they don't attend regularly.
All right.
But I tell them too because
Be safe.
I'm trying to be consistent.
Yes. Yes.
Am I okay right now?
Yeah.
He said, I have called you to consistency because that's my nature.
Right.
I created you. My son is much like me in many of his mannerisms and his ways because he belongs to me.
Right.
He has some of my human nature, genetically.
Right.
If you are supposed to be born of the kingdom and born of the Almighty and God has created you and we know that He has, somehow there's got to be some of His nature that begins to take over.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And what used to be spiritual wreck and spiritual confusion and spiritual inconsistency and spiritual disaster has somehow changed
Right.
to consistency.
Yeah.
And as they get ready to play, and we're going to come to the altar for a few moments, Paul teaches to the church at Corinth, and I know the context of it, he's talking about the order of the church, but aside all that, he teaches them that God is not the author of confusion. Now, interesting, Brother Driscoll, I looked that up, and another word, there are many synonyms that can be used for confusion there, but I looked that up, and one synonym that can be used there is instability.
Right. Right.
Another synonym for instability is inconsistency.
Right.
Now,
Come on.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to insult you.
Come on.
But if you say that you're a Christian, and you say that you love God, and you say that you're serving God, and yet the only fruit you bear is inconsistency, you're not telling the truth. Because God is not the author of confusion or instability or inconsistency.
Right.
How many people this morning want God to help you become a more consistent Christian?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How many people will be willing to step out of their pew before we go to dinner and go be with our families on this Sunday afternoon and make their way to an old-fashioned altar and say,